the Fifth Management Plans Municipal Subgroup. My name is Natalie Mast. I'm the AMA Director responsible for the management plans here at ADWR, and I have with me McKenna Welch, who is one of our management plan specialists. We're going to be walking through some of the legal language, proposed draft legal language for the Fifth Management Plan's municipal conservation programs today. But before we get to that, I'm going to hand things off to Maggie Martin to run through some of our webinar logistics today. Maggie?
Thank you, Natalie, and hello, everyone. My name is Maggie Martin. I'm a management plan specialist here at ADWR, and I'm going to be going over the webinar logistics. Please remain muted unless we're speaking. If you would like to speak, please type your name into the chat, or if you prefer, you can type your comments or questions into the chat, and we will read them aloud instead. Please make sure to send your messages to everyone in the chat so that they do not get missed. If you have any technical difficulties throughout the meeting today, you can contact the ADWR help desk.
Maggie. Oh, sorry there, Maggie. We're having a little trouble hearing you. Your audio is breaking up a little bit. Maybe I'll just let McKenna run through the last bits of that and the next slide.
That's fine. So I'll just go through our webinar logistics again. So please remain muted if you're not speaking. If you would like to speak, please type your name in the chat and we will call on people throughout the meeting. You can also type your questions or comments directly into the chat and we will read those and respond to those. Make sure that you send your messages to everyone so that they do not get missed. And if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you can contact the ADWR help desk. Their phone number and email are on this slide. And the meeting and the chat will both be recorded. So we have been using these Google Form questionnaires, as most of you know, just to provide additional opportunities for feedback and input. All of the questions are optional on our Google Forms, and the responses are posted to our 5MP concepts page anonymously. Please respond by August 11th. And Maggie just put the link to the Google Form questionnaire in the chat box now.
Great. Thank you, McKenna. So as I said, this is a meeting of our Fifth Management Plan's Municipal Subgroup. McKenna, if you could go to the next slide, please. So we are really just here today to focus on our proposed Fifth Management Plan's regulatory language for the conservation programs that we've been working through and discussing and developing over the last year and a half, or maybe closer to 2 years at this point. I have lost track of the time, so 2 years. We're really looking forward to discussing this with all of you. For those of you who have been a part of this process throughout that whole 2-year time frame, none of this will really be a surprise for you, but we're looking forward to working through some of the actual draft language and taking any feedback that you might have. If you could go to the next slide, please. So just as a reminder of where we're at in this process, like I said, we've been working through this for about 2 years now. We actually started that development process in, it was July of 2019, so just about exactly 2 years, where we were analyzing the existing programs, starting to develop concepts for the new programs. We're really proud of how far we've come in that time frame. I know 2 years kind of sounds like a long time, but it doesn't feel like a long time, and we've made a huge amount of progress in that time, and it's been a lot of work. So we really appreciate the input and the participation from all of you throughout this process, and we're looking forward to getting into the next phase here. So as I said, if you've been with us throughout this whole process, we don't think anything here will really be a surprise to you, but we're looking forward to kind of finalizing some of these programs. You can see on the screen that we have 2022 listed as our adoption timeframe. So our plan there is to publish the initial drafts of these documents early next year, along with doing some presentations to our individual GUACs, Groundwater User Advisory Councils in each AMA, after which time we would start the formal promulgation process, which includes hearings and noticings and findings and all of those formal legal steps associated with the actual adoption of those plans. Next slide. Yep. So just for a little bit of heads up about how this meeting is going to go today. So like I said, we are going to be reviewing the legal language for these programs, the draft legal language for these programs. What that means is maybe a little bit unclear if you haven't been deep into the management plans previously. So for a little bit of background, typically the way the regulatory chapters in the management plan are laid out is that there's a part at the beginning that contains narrative. That narrative is just background information, might include data, but includes kind of layman terms descriptions of the municipal programs. And then at the end of the chapter, there's what we refer to as the regulatory language or the legally enforceable language that is the actual kind of nitty-gritty meat of those regulatory programs. That is the legally enforceable language, and that's italicized at the end of each chapter. So if you were to flip through the management plan, the portions that you see that are italicized at the end of each chapter is what is the formal language of those conservation program requirements. So as I mentioned, we're focusing on that italicized language today, that regulatory language. What we're going to do as we work through that today, because we recognize that legal language can be a little bit dry, we are going to start with a little bit of a summary. So what we're going to talk through is not the entire section of legal language, but we're going to focus on the parts that have changes between the third, fourth, and fifth management plans. So I'm going to hand it off to McKenna in a couple minutes here, and what she'll do is summarize those changes that occurred between the third and fourth and fifth management plans, and then we'll show the actual draft regulatory language for the fifth management plans. With each kind of chunk that we'll discuss in that way, we'll also allow a little bit of time for questions, comments, and we are looking for input from all of you, and both in this meeting and through the questionnaire on the language there, whether it's clear, whether there's any wordsmithing that needs to be done, whether there's any questions there. So hopefully we can have a productive conversation. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide. And sorry, I'm seeing a question that came in from Patrick Adams. Will the formal promulgation process be the first opportunity to comment on the narrative and the non-regulatory sections of the 5MP? I'll talk about this a little bit at the end. I'm going to kind of recap the timeline at the end. But the answer simply, Patrick, is no. So we intend to publish the initial drafts of those fifth management plans around January. We will accept informal comments and feedback from both the GUACs and stakeholders on the full draft at that time. And then we'll publish an updated draft ahead of starting that formal promulgation legal adoption process. So there are multiple points in this process where we'll be taking additional feedback on that full draft. Okay. With that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to McKenna to jump right into this legal language.
Awesome. Thank you, Natalie. So, hi everyone, my name is McKenna Welsh. I am a management plan specialist at ADWR, and like Natalie said, I will be going over the changes in the regulatory language. Since much of it has carried over from the third and fourth management plans, I'll just be going over the main changes that will be in the fifth management plan. So the first change I will be covering is the water types included in the GPCD calculation. Under the third management plans, all sources of water were included in the GPCD calculation except spill water, direct use effluent, effluent recovered within the area of impact, and providers could also request that some non-residential CAP deliveries be excluded as well. Under the fourth management plans, all sources of water were included in the GPCD calculation except direct use effluent and effluent recovered within the area of impact. And under the draft fifth management plans, all sources of water will be included in the GPCD calculation except non-potable direct use effluent and non-potable effluent recovered within the area of impact. The rationale for changing the water types included in the GPCD calculation comes from the changes in value of water over time. With the scarcity of all water types, there have been changes in the way the water community values effluent in their water portfolios. The One Water concept focuses on the fact that the urban water cycle is a single integrated system, meaning the way that we use water is all connected. The draft fifth management plan language is intended to capture all sources of potable water, and potable effluent is a valuable source of water, so we updated this calculation to recognize and more accurately demonstrate its value. So this is the draft language for the GPCD calculation, and I'll go ahead and pause here for a minute to allow time for questions or comments on this. Okay, so we're not seeing any questions or comments at this point, so I'll go ahead and move on, but if anybody has any questions on this topic, we can come back to it. So under the third management plans, the GPCD requirement was calculated each year using a theoretical low-end GPCD estimate established for each AMA. Under the fourth management plans, a similar approach was taken, but the addition of a default minimum and maximum calculation was introduced. If the default GPCD requirement was under the minimum, then the requirement would be the minimum, and if the default GPCD requirement was over the maximum, then the requirement would be the maximum. If neither of those were true, then the GPCD requirement would be the default. Under the fifth management plans, we kept the default minimum and maximum boundaries, but updated the calculations. We heard feedback that the previous calculations were confusing and outdated. They were not responsive to changes in the provider service area. In some cases, these calculations resulted in unrealistic GPCD requirements, either being much higher or lower than what the provider was actually achieving. To address all of these concerns, we looked for more straightforward calculations that would result in GPCD requirements that are realistic, but still reduce withdrawals of groundwater. Under the fifth management plans, the default is calculated using a 3-year rolling average of the provider's GPCD minus 1%. The minimum is calculated using the provider's previous year GPCD requirement minus 1%, and the maximum is calculated using a 5-year rolling average of the provider's GPCD. This is the regulatory language for the GPCD requirement calculation. This was previously in Appendix 5A, but was moved under the GPCD program language, so people wouldn't have to flip back and forth between those pages for all the details. I'll pause here again for a minute to allow time for questions and comments. All right, so moving on. The flexibility provisions account for variations in precipitation each year. The third management plans and fourth management plans have varying flexibility limitations depending on the AMA. The Tucson and Prescott AMAs have a negative limit of -10 and a positive limit of 30. The Pinal AMA has a negative limit of -15 and a positive limit of 45. And the Phoenix and Santa Cruz AMAs have a negative limit of -20 and a positive limit of 60. The different ranges across the AMAs didn't seem to be based on factors such as precipitation, so we streamlined the flexibility provisions across all AMAs using the midpoint of -15 and 45. This will also make the program easier to communicate and easier to administer. The flexibility account determines whether a provider is in or out of compliance with their GPCD requirement. If a provider goes below their maximum negative limit, then they are out of compliance for that year. We did an analysis of how the 5MP GPCD proposal would impact providers, and under the current GPCD program, 9 providers were out of compliance in 2019, and under the 5th management plan proposal, only 1 provider would have been out of compliance in 2019. And this is the draft regulatory language for that section, and we will pause here again.
All right, so we have a question here from Brett Fleck at Peoria. Thanks, Brett. Did ADWR look at GPCD fluctuations for sample water providers over a multi-year deep drought period, and how GPCD exceedances might total over the regulatory limit? In other words, is -15 enough? Do you want to try to take that, or do you want me to? I can. So thanks, Brett, for that question. It's a good question. So we did look at historical periods. Obviously, particularly our more recent historical periods have seen some significant drought, and we kind of took that as an indicator and a part of our analysis as to whether that flex account would be enough. Because the new targets are set on a rolling average basis, we think that as those adjust over time in response to what a provider is actually achieving, we do believe that the -15 range is sufficient to be responsive to drought conditions, to changes in the service area, those types of things. The design of this program is ultimately a design that puts downward pressure on GPCDs. So if a provider is seeing increasing GPCDs consistently year over year, then perhaps this program isn't the right program for them. And that's part of why we have 2 different programs in this structure, because there are alternatives, excuse me, there is an alternative for those providers who, for whatever reason, might not see the GPCD program as a good fit. We definitely see the non-per capita program as a perfectly valid program, a perfectly valid decision for providers to take.
Well, and I would add, too, one of the things that we haven't seen in our recent history are and any big messaging campaigns around, voluntary additional reductions of water use. And we haven't yet experienced Colorado River shortage. That is increasingly in the news, and will be increasingly on the public's mind. What we saw back in the 2002-2003 period, there were additional calls for conservation, there was greater awareness, and we really did see GPCD decline. So even though we are experiencing hotter, drier weather on a consistent basis, and we know that that's driving up some landscape water use, I still think in the near future we're going to see reductions in some of the exterior water use as people are more careful about it. So it'll be interesting to analyze.
For sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett.
Okay, so moving on to the non-per capita conservation program tiers and BMP points. On this slide, you can see the difference between the tiers for the third management plans, fourth management plans, and the draft fifth management plans. Under the fourth management plans, BMP points were added and the targets were increased per tier. Under the fifth management plans, we added a fourth tier and adjusted the service connections so that providers were more equitably distributed across the tiers. We adjusted the required BMP points and added a required number of categories that points must be earned from to promote a more diverse range of BMPs being implemented. Here is the draft language for the non-per capita conservation program tiers and BMP points, and the table that's included in the regulatory language. And we will go ahead and pause here again. Okay, we will move on to the next topic. So the draft Appendix 5C, which contains the list of BMPs, has been continually updated over the past year with extensive stakeholder input, and it's been posted to our fifth management plan's concepts page. I won't be going through each BMP again since we have done that in previous meetings, but the list of BMPs is available in the draft regulatory language that was posted 2 weeks ago, and you may still submit feedback on these BMPs. Under the draft fifth management plans, we added a planning category and planning-related BMPs, updated the implementation and reporting requirements to require more quantitative data, updated the BMP points, split the BMPs into residential and non-residential categories where applicable, and added language to better incorporate private water utilities into the non-per capita conservation program. So I will stop here just if anyone has any questions, and we can still pull up this language if anyone has specific questions or comments on this part.
This is Brett Fleck from the City of Peoria. Just to provide some positive feedback, I'd like to thank the department for working hard with stakeholders to update this program. It's a complicated program. There's a lot of details but I really think it's effective, and it provides a great opportunity for folks to have an alternative to the total GPC program. So I appreciate the department moving this program in the right direction. I think we still have a little ways to go on it, but maybe a 6th management plan might help that out, which I'm sure is exactly what you want to hear, Natalie.
Thanks for that, Brett. We really appreciate that feedback, and would appreciate hearing your additional ideas on additional steps that this program could take, whether it's for the 5th management plans or anything beyond that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brett. I don't see any other questions or comments, so I'll move on to the next topic. So I'm going to go over how to submit feedback on this regulatory language. So on our 5th management plan's meeting page, under this meeting, we have the draft regulatory language posted. We will also be adding this to our concepts page sometime this week. But it was also available in the email that was sent out for this meeting, and you can find it on the slide. So there will be 4 places for you to look for that. So if you're going to access it from the slide, you can go ahead and click on the language here. It'll open in a Word document. And if you're not familiar with track changes, if you go to review, it should already be turned on. I saved it with track changes on. So you can go ahead and make your edits directly into this document, save it, and then you can upload it through our questionnaire. So in this questionnaire, there is an Add File button where you can upload your Word document with your track changes. If that doesn't work for you, it requires a Gmail account, so I know not all of you will be able to submit it this way. You can also email it to our management plans at azwater.gov email. And if you have just general comments or questions about any of the language, you can just email us as well. All right.
I do have one other question that came, or 2 other questions that came in.
Okay.
So we'll go back to the chat here because we had a couple questions come in. Brian Draper says, there were comments in prior meetings about BMP points obtained from public-private partnership programs. Will these points need to stay between these parties or shared among other service areas?
So we decided that that would be, it would not go to other service areas. So those points would only go to the parties that implemented the BMPs in their service area.
Right, right. So the program itself is by service area, so the BMP points will be accrued per service area. Correct. Good. Thanks, Brian. The next comment we have here is from Heather, and it says, will we be going through the BMPs today so that we can ask questions about why some changes were adopted and others weren't? This will help guide providers to know where to focus comments and suggestions for improvement. Heather, thanks for that question. So we did not intend to go through that BMP language today. That language has been up on our website and has been updated over time pretty regularly for several months now, I think. So our intent today was to just kind of go through these new portions that folks hadn't seen yet. We're certainly still accepting comments. If there's something specific that you think we got wrong in that BMP list, we would love to hear that. And we'd certainly be happy to sit down with specific folks or have those conversations if we need to. All right. Well, we're looking at a little bit of a quick meeting, which is just fine because, like I said at the beginning, I don't think much of this was super new for you guys, but we wanted to make sure that we were taking the time to walk through what some of the changes between those management plans have been and also introduce both the rationale for some of those changes and how you might provide some additional feedback. So thank you, McKenna, for doing such a good job of walking through all of that. If you could go to the next slide, please. So at this point in our timeline, we do not have any additional meetings scheduled. So what we are currently doing is working through writing each of those 5th management plans. We will be looking for any feedback that we receive in that questionnaire, and we'll be kind of considering the couple questions for clarification that we did receive during this meeting. And we will be working toward publishing initial drafts of the 5th management plans early next year. So we are really excited to have made it this far in the process. It's been, sometimes it has felt like it's gone really fast, and sometimes it's felt like a really long road. But we are really grateful for the stakeholder participation and all of the many questions and pieces of feedback and ideas that you all have provided throughout this process. So, I think, so we have a question from Raluca. I think we might have a typo on our slide here. She's asking, the deadline for the questionnaire is today. What time does it close? It does not close today. Sorry about that, Raluca. That is a good catch. McKenna, do you have the date for that closing?
It's August 11th.
August 11th. So that will actually close on August 11th. We apologize for that typo there. So if we could go to the next slide, please. I'm just going to recap a little bit this timeline that I pointed out at the beginning. So like I said, we have been working on this for about 2 years now. As we are kind of getting to the end of our drafting process, we are really wanting any additional feedback or consideration of clarity of the language for that regulatory language that is posted on our website and that we reviewed today. So we're really looking forward to hearing some additional feedback from you all. As we move into that adoption process next year, there are a lot of steps there. And I appreciate the question that Patrick asked at the beginning, because that's something that I do want to emphasize, is that just because we're getting to kind of the end of this development process doesn't mean this is the end of opportunity to give feedback. So we will publish those initial drafts in around January, and we'll take informal questions, comments, clarifications on those initial drafts. We will work to update those initial drafts in response to any of the comments that we receive, both from the general public and from our GUACs. And before we begin our promulgation process, we'll publish an updated version of each of those drafts, incorporating those corrections and some of those suggestions and those types of things into that kind of final draft ahead of the promulgation process. The promulgation process itself also includes a hearing and public comment process. So there is a formal comment period associated with the actual legal adoption process as well, in which you can submit additional written comments if there's written comments or verbal comments at the hearing, if there's anything that you still feel like we've missed or haven't incorporated or properly considered through this process. So there are, all along this way, we've tried to make this a transparent process. We've tried to provide many points of contact for those types of comments, and we intend to continue doing that kind of along the way throughout the next year through that promulgation process. I'm seeing that a couple questions are coming in, so we'll go to the chat now. From Tina Sleeper, can you include the link? Oh, okay, it looks like Maggie dropped the link to the questionnaire in the chat, so that is there.
Adria's having a problem opening it, though.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that, Adria. We will, Adria, if you are unable to get that link to work, or if anyone else is having trouble with that link working, please just feel free to send us an email at managementplans@azwater.gov, and we can send you the list of questions or provide an alternate way for you to provide that same feedback. Hopefully it's working. It looks like it's working for some people on Chrome. So, yeah. Okay, so we'll double check the permissions on that link to make sure that it works, but we'll, yeah, if you do have any trouble with it, please feel free to email us. We have a comment here from Patrick. Thanks, Patrick. Thank you for walking everyone through the regulatory changes between the management plans. We'll be sure to review the draft language and submit comments prior to the deadline, which is August 11th? Yes, perfect, August 11th. So I think that is the last of our questions. Thank you, Raluca, for dropping that email, managementplans@azwater.gov, into the chat there. McKenna, could you go to the next slide? You'll see here, as I kind of mentioned earlier, we're really nearing the end of our development process. So a lot of these meeting dates just say TBD. We're certainly open to having additional meetings at this point, but we're at the point where we're at in the process, we are only going to kind of do that we're only going to schedule those as needed. So we are looking forward to wrapping some of this up. We're looking forward to getting those initial drafts out. We'll likely schedule one more work group meeting to cover some process type things. Perhaps we'll do that alongside actually publishing those drafts to make sure we're calling good attention to that. And we do have 2 other subgroup meetings coming up here in the next few weeks, Ag on August 11th and Turf on August 17th. So with that, I'm still seeing some activity in the chat, so maybe we'll just pause for a minute here to allow any additional questions or comments to come through. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and pause. Okay, great. It looks like Amanda was able to post the full link to that Google form in the chat here. So for anyone for whom the short link was not working, that full link appears to be working for folks. We'll work to get the shorter link corrected. There may have been some kind of error in how that was generated, but we'll work on correcting that and make sure that we get an updated version posted with the presentation and with that legal language. All of that information is currently on our public meetings calendar, on the kind of calendar item for this meeting, but we will also be adding it to our 5MP concepts page. That I think hopefully someone can drop that link into the chat for me. So that'll all be available, posted on our 5MP concepts page as well, so you'll have access to the BMP list, to this legal language, and to the questionnaire all in one place. And with that, since I'm not seeing, thank you, Maggie or McKenna, whoever dropped that into the chat. So I'm not seeing any additional comments or questions coming in, so we'll go ahead and close out today. I've said it a few times even just in this meeting, but I really do want to express my gratitude. We are so, so thankful for all of your participation and genuinely the ideas and the brainstorming and the really deep thoughtfulness that went into a lot of this process. So we appreciate all of your time, and we look forward to moving into the next stage of this process with you all. So thank you for your time today, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Thank you.